Hey there, my name is Cole Adams, and you are watching the best college basketball podcast out there that covers the entire sport of college basketball, brackets, bubbles, and bid stealers. Now, here are your hosts, Sam Fetterman and Jonathan Lidskin.
Season 6, episode 21 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. No Sam Fetterman today, but I'm Jonathan Lidskin here, per usual, and I'm joined alongside Dylan Smith. Dylan, how are you? Good to see you.
Good. Yeah, thanks for having me on today. Big fan of the podcast. You and Sam are doing a great job, and I'm excited to talk Michigan hoops right now.
Yeah, Dylan is now a Michigan graduate. He has been a Michigan fan his entire life. I've known him pretty much, since grade school, elementary school. And we talk Michigan pretty often, I'd say, both football and basketball.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I feel like when we're talking about like college sports in general, and I say this as a huge Michigan guy, but right now I think Michigan in both sports is one of the schools kind of pushing the boundaries of like roster building in the NIL era. And so there's a lot of really exciting stuff going on. Specifically, usually it's on the football side that we're talking about it, but Michigan hoops last year under Dusty May had really great first season. We saw a little bit of how he's going to attack the portal and how he's going to build up his rosters for future years. And I think this year, given like a full off season, coming off of a good season, you really are seeing the vision he has for this program and this team. And I'm sure we're going to get into this, but I think that there are maybe a few, like 5 to 10 schools who have done as good of a job as Michigan has done this portal cycle in building a roster. And I'm really excited to see how this roster comes together and how the pieces fit.
Yeah, it's certainly a unique group. But obviously, we've seen Dusty May put together unique groups for a couple of years now at FAU and now at Michigan. And, the whole talk was last year about Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden, two 7-footers playing together. It was a national story. Matt Norlander did a huge article about it with Evan Miyakawa over at CBS. And now you come into year 2 and you bring in Yaxel Lenneborg, who's supposed to go pro, decides to come back to college. He's going to Michigan out of UAB. Merez Johnson comes over from Illinois, stays in conference, and then Ade Mara from UCLA, the 7'3" center, who will now be a junior. So, you look at this Michigan roster, Dylan, and you look at it, and you don't see a conventional roster build here where you have shooters on the wings and one center one forward that stretches the floor. One center who's kind of like your rim protector. Dusty does things in really unconventional ways, and that's kind of what I think can make this roster so special because there's a tremendous amount of talent here, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think what you can see with the work Dusty and the staff, but real quick, before we get started, I want to give a big shout out to someone who I feel like nationally might not get a lot of recognition, but Kyle Church, who's a longtime assistant of Dusty May. From what I've heard from Michigan sources inside the building, like he's the guy who's really like the general manager or the guy looking to fundraise all the NIL, and he plays a big role in building the roster each year. So I think him, the rest of the coaching staff, and of course Dusty, they had a real vision of just supplementing the current core of guys that they're returning. Namari Burnett, Will Cheddar. They're going to have LJ Kaysen, who's supposed to take a big jump this year. And they wanted to, and Roddy Gale, of course, and they wanted to supplement those guys with players who are going to bring some playmaking, right? You mentioned Danny Wolf. He was a big part of the playmaking last year. And Trey Donaldson left to go to Miami. So they really needed guys who can play make, who can find open shooters, who can run in transition. And then they also wanted to, I think, become a better rebounding team. So with those two main aspects, you can see how a lot of these players fit into that mold. They went out and got Elliot Cadeau, point guard, out of UNC, obviously a highly rated recruit a few years ago. Had some up and down moments in North Carolina, And by no means is he a star offensive scorer, right? He's had struggles shooting the ball. I think he shot 34% from three last year and also went through a stretch where he was basically left wide open. But again, if you look at the blueprint that Dusty wanted, he wanted a team that could run in transition and who can play make with the ball in their hands out of pick and roll and out of runouts and then still be a good defensive guard. And I think that's what Cadeau brings a little bit more than Donaldson. So Donaldson was a much better shooter, I think, than what Cadeau is hoping to be.
Yeah.
Cadeau just brings a lot more playmaking, is going to run. And when you look at the other guys, like the other bigs they brought in, right? A Diamara, a guy who can work in the pick and roll with Elliot Cadeau. And I think it's going to look a little bit more like how Dusty really wants to play than last year. If you look at the pieces around this team, it's not going to be the bigs in the 4-5 pick and roll we saw with Dusty, with Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden. I think it's going to be more running on transition, putting the ball in the hands of your playmakers. And then, again, you'll have really good front court play, hopefully, with Adai Mara, Morris Johnson, and Yaxel Lendenberg, who could bring a lot of physicality.
Yeah, so you mentioned Cadeau. Cadeau was this was actually the first year I started doing like real freshman rankings. Cadeau, after he reclassified, ended up being my number one ranked player for the class of 2023. And that was mainly because in a class full of, guys that I think most of the people in college basketball that follow recruiting were really unsure of, Cadeau had a really elite offensive skill set that we knew was going to be translatable. And at UNC, it was. Like he was one of the best passers in the country in the 2 years he was there. But what I think hurt him a lot was not just the jump shot, is he did turn the ball over a lot, because I don't think that like Hubert Davis exactly made things easy on him. Like in the Michigan Dusty May system, he's going to have a lot more easy decisions to make versus, creating these super high level assists. And of course, that's playing next to, a much better interior finishing team. UNC last year really had no true center that they could rely upon. And then like your wings is kind of probably where I have questions here. Like, but if Kaysen takes a jump, McKenney, the freshman, we'll get to him, is a big-time shooter. And, of course, we've talked about Winters Grady as well as a guy that can come off the bench and hit shots. I just think Cadeau's in a much better situation here. And, that seems to be the overwhelming feeling coming out of, like, guys who leave UNC. Like, you had Drake Powell talk about, this summer, guy, like, really didn't get a chance to show his full potential there because the system wasn't great. So I think things are going to be a lot easier on Cadeau. I think his jump shot will probably be better by default of him, like, of more gravity being pulled away from him and more into this front court.
Yeah, and the last point on Cadeau is mentioning the turnovers, because I think it was obviously a big problem for Michigan last year.
He had a 27 or 26% turnover rate last year. Assist rate was 38%, so like you'll still take that. But yeah, those need to go down.
And I guess that could also be a difference in philosophy with Dusty and kind of some other coaches in Power 5 conferences. I don't think Dusty villainizes turnovers as much. I think he's actually okay with Cadeau committing some of these turnovers if he's also making plays that he wouldn't normally, or an average point guard wouldn't normally make, where he's attempting harder passes within the flow of the offense. Mm-hmm. And we saw with Danny Wolf, like Danny Wolf was turning the ball over at a crazy rate last year and was still a first-round pick, and the offense was still running through him. So the turnover thing is really interesting to me, because there are times where the turnovers really hindered Michigan, but there were also times where I think if they didn't have that level of freedom in the system, the offense wouldn't have been as strong, right? It's almost like I think the turnovers will be better because, again, you don't have a 7-foot guy running your whole offense. Mm-hmm. You have a real point guard. But I would be a little bit careful thinking that Cadeau is going to come in a new situation. All of a sudden, the turnover issue is not going to.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be like non-existent per se, because you don't want him like not taking any risks.
Yeah,
but I do think it's going to be better, as in like he's going to know more what to do now. It's not going to be just on him to create something out of nothing.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. And then to your point about the wings, that is the biggest weakness for this team, and it's more specifically the shooting. Outside shooting was a struggle last year, and I don't know if the additions they added this year, besides maybe the freshmen who are coming in supposed to be really good shooters, but again, you never know with these freshmen going into the Big Ten or the SEC or the ACC. So we'll see about the shooting. Burnett was one of the better shooters in the Big Ten last year. It's great to have him back as an older guy, and you could pencil him in for probably 38% at least shooting from the three-point line. But again, I'm not quite sure where the other threes come from. And at the end of the day, like, do they need to be a great three-point shooting team, or are they just going to out-rebound everyone and run in transition and just create extra possessions?
Yeah, so Michigan finished 43rd in adjusted offensive efficiency last year. They shot 33% from three as a team. That was good for like 205th in the country. They were really good 2-point percentage offense, obviously, because of those two bigs and how impossible it was to guard their pick and roll sometimes. But they really made a killing on the offense when they played well offensively, because they were in a good offensive rebounding team, which we expect them to be again. It's just I think their ceiling offensively depends on, what do you get out of McKinney? Does Roddy Gale become this guy who's like all of a sudden unplayable offensively, or does he stay kind of how he was last year, which was a good defender, which got him on the floor, but you were playing 4-on-5 sometimes on offense with him.
Yeah, Roddy's super interesting, and he's definitely, if there is a player to watch going into the season as almost like an X factor for Michigan, I think it's Roddy Gale. And we saw last year, first of all, Roddy Gale was brought in last year to be the best player on the team. Mm-hmm. Like, he was supposed to be the offensive engine. And it was a very up and down year. Like, at times it honestly looked like he struggled to even stay on the court, committing like turnovers that you never really see from Power 5 players, like walking with the ball 3 possessions in a row. And he couldn't shoot. That was the main problem. He came in as a guy who you hoped would continue to be able to shoot a respectable percentage from 3, and he couldn't do that. Now, the last few games of the year, the tournament game against Texas A&M and UC San Diego, he was one of the best players on the floor, and he was shooting at a great clip. And so you're hoping that with some more space on offense, with a little bit less weight on his shoulders to carry the offense, you're hoping that he can be a guy who would at least give you 35% from 3.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things with him is, like, first of all, you look at his numbers sophomore year at Ohio State, and I mean, he was a more efficient player on higher usage in his sophomore year than he was last year at Michigan. And then, he obviously is a good job of drawing fouls, and he was a better passer his sophomore year at Ohio State as well. So it's very weird that with less of a responsibility, those numbers ended up going down. But I think, like, one of the important things with him this year is, if you really look at Michigan's bench last year, LJ Kaysen, you and I both thought would contribute as a freshman, despite what the rankings said about him. And he did. But LJ went through his share of freshman mishaps and freshman struggles. I think if he takes a step forward, you don't have as much of a problem, because, obviously he'll be more efficient. He'll be more reliable. He won't turn the ball over as much. So you kind of have that guy lurking behind Gale if he's not playing up to standards offensively, and then you can kind of plug him in when you want more defense on the floor. Yeah,
and I think the LJ and Roddy discussion is going to be really interesting, at least within Michigan circles. A lot of people really liked what they saw out of LJ, me included. But he was a freshman last year, and the jump that he has to make, I think, to be a starter on this quality level of a team. Like, we're not talking about a team last year who has a whole new roster, new head coach, like they're kind of playing with house money. This year, they're expected to be one of the top 3 teams in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And I think in order to play at that level, LJ needs to take a step up. But I wouldn't count out Roddy just yet, because I do think the areas where LJ is more deficient right now, which is mainly just defense, and like physicality in general, I think Roddy actually excels at.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see that battle. I mean, if Michigan is really going to be a 1 seed come March, I think it's because LJ Kaysen has taken a step up and is penciled in as a starter each game. I just don't know if that's going to happen right away. And I definitely see a situation where Michigan fans are a little bit unhappy with the amount of play that Roddy's getting and LJ are getting. But I think that's because Roddy does a lot of things that Dusty's going to appreciate on a team where he wants to be physical. They want to be able to run in transition. And that all starts with being able to defend and rebound, which Roddy, I think, does at a much better clip than LJ.
Yeah, I think the Michigan's really going to be able to play some lineups here where their rebounding is just out of this world good. The offensive, the outside shooting obviously could be a problem with some of these lineups that they throw out here, but I trust Dusty enough to figure that out. And so, kind of with that said, you go into this front court here and you have, we mentioned the names, Lendeborg, Merez, Mara, Cheddar. Like Lendeborg and Johnson were two of the more coveted transfers in the country. Mara is one of the more, in my opinion, underrated guys in the country. And then Cheddar's obviously, that veteran presence in the front court that can step out and hit shots. How do you kind of see this rotation working out between these four guys? Because there's a ton of really interesting options here that they could go to.
Yeah, the first thing I would do is I would kind of throw out a little bit about what Michigan did last year. I think with Wolf and Golden, it was a very specific skill set that Wolf brought and a very specific skill set that Golden brought. And I think that's why they played the front court the way they did. I think it's going to be much more of a rotation this year. And I think it's going to be much more lineup dependent, which means that Dusty, as we've seen, he's not afraid of thinking outside the box, of playing interesting 3 big lineups with Cheddar at the 3. Like last year, they played some lineups with Wolf kind of at the 3/4, Cheddar and Golden, which gave you a lot of outside shooting, gave you some playmaking, and then you still had Golden for rim protection and rebounding. I could see them going to something similar with Yexel being kind of that Danny Wolf type where he's a big, but he can also play make with the ball in his hands. He doesn't kind of clog up an outside shooting spot because he can shoot from 3. And then you just run a lineup with Yexel, Mara, and Cheddar. I think the only combination that you won't see is going to be Morez and Mara, just because I think Dusty's going to want to have no more than one guy on the floor who really can't shoot. And neither of those guys, even though you see the practice clips of Morez chucking up threes, like none of those guys are going to be expected to shoot. So I think it's going to be a real like platoon situation with Morez and Mara, with one of them playing at a time. But with Cheddar and Yexel, they're kind of chess pieces that can fit into either a 3 big lineup or a 2 big lineup. And then I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the Morez versus Mara conversation, because a lot of people like Morez, and I do too. I think he brings great physicality. Doesn't have the most polished offensive game, but is going to be very physical, going to get on the boards, and has shown to be a really productive player in the Big Ten. I love what Mara's upside is in this Dusty May system, simply because he's not just 7'3", but I think he has a passing ability that is very special. And I kind of want to see him playing with Yexel. So now I don't really know how they handle Morez, Mara, and Yexel all together.
So what's so interesting to me about this group is like we know Yaxel's an NBA prospect. Like, he was an NBA prospect this year. He's probably not going to be much different than what he was at UAB, outside of maybe being in a more productive system. We know Morez is an elite rebounder, and like if given the opportunity, could lead the Big Ten in rebounding this year. The thing with Mara that's so interesting to me is I think he still has a lot of room in his offensive game to grow, even though his efficiency numbers and usage were pretty high last year. The defense with him is just out of this world. Like UCLA was a completely different defense when he was on the floor, which granted, because of, conditioning, was not all that much. He only played about 32% of the minutes for them. But his block rate was 17%, which is absurdly high, even for the amount of minutes he played. And if you go look at the defensive rating when he was on the floor versus off, you go look at the on-off numbers, it's just out of this world good. So like I don't think that there's a scenario where this is a bad addition for Michigan because he gives you a different level of rim protection when he's out there, even if it's just for 35% of the game. And like his conditioning really can't get worse, right? Like it can only get better.
Yeah, I mean, like the caveat for all this is that Mara has such a small sample size last year, and I don't know if there were rumors that he had an illness he was dealing with, or I don't know what Mick Cronin might just have it value him differently, but he really only played like 10 to 15 minutes a game.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree. If he's not going to be able to play like 25 minutes, that's fine. You put him in high leverage situations in the lineups you want, and you let him just dominate the paint. And then the big thing to me is Mara going to play more than 20 minutes a game? Probably not. And then in that case, is it going to be Morez is playing, starting the game, and then Mara's coming in? Or I think for the jump ball, there's a whole conversation within Michigan circles now about the jump ball thing. Yeah. But the big thing is you want to have a lot of depth at this spot.
Yeah.
And especially in the Big Ten. And I don't know if there's a Big Ten team who can withstand a full game of having to go up against a Daimara, a giant, and then Morris Johnson, who just wants to bully you.
Yeah, the only teams in the country that, like, I think, can maybe manage, or at least in the conference at that spot, is like, at least like we know that Michigan State has two serviceable guys that'll probably start for them, even if their benches and all that in that spot. And then outside of that, like, who knows, like, what Purdue's front court's going to look like right now. We know Clough is good, but he's not good defensively. We know TKR is good offensively, but he's not good defensively. And so their defense kind of all depends on Jacobson, at least on the interior. So, I don't want to, like, compare Mara to this guy because, like, you're not replicating this guy. But, like, you go look at Zach Edey's sophomore year. His offense was outstanding in limited minutes. He was playing less than half the game for Purdue because they had a Travion Williams there. And then as he became a junior and a senior, his defense progressed to an elite level from there. Mara's kind of in the opposite situation. He's already one of the best defenders at the rim in the country. And his offense probably needs to come along a little more in terms of, rim finishing, even though the numbers weren't bad, and they weren't bad with Edey either. So, like, it's just so interesting to me because you have Yaxel, who might be a first-team All-American in the preseason. You have Morez, who was outstanding as a freshman at Illinois and is this elite rebounder. And then you have this guy sitting behind them that could be one of the best players in the country if development comes along the right way. And we just don't know yet.
Yeah, and the last note on Mara is, again, I mentioned it earlier, the passing, it really is an important skill for him. I remember when he was a big-time international recruit, I know there's a lot of schools in on him, and the biggest thing with him was that, okay, he's huge, he's going to rim protect, but he's also a very skilled passer. And that's a skill for big guys that Dusty needs. Like Yaxel's a great passer. Like, I think they're going to want to play a lot out of the high post or the elbow where you can run a pick and roll, you can hit Mara or Yaxel on a short roll, and then he could play make from there. So I'm really curious to see how Mara works in this offense. If you think it's going to be like UCLA where Mara is just setting screens and posting up, that's not what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I don't think that's
he's going to be moved around for the 15 minutes of the game that he's in. And you're going to force a lot of these opposing big men to guard him in multiple situations. And I think that his passing, playmaking, and just overall basketball intelligence is going to stand out for him there.
If the last thing I'll say about him before we start to wrap this up is that, like, if you don't believe that he can make this kind of substantial jump where he becomes one of the best players in the conference or maybe even the country, is go look at the jump that he took from his freshman to his sophomore year and tell me that can't happen again. And then the other thing is, and I just, like, scrolling on KenPom found this, Ade Mara was Ken Palm MVP in a game 3 times last season. 2 of those times he played 21 minutes. Like, that should be impossible. And one of those times was in the first round against Utah State. He had 10 points in that game. He had 5 blocks in 21 minutes. Like, his defensive instincts are really off the charts good. So, anything to add on Cheddar or Yaxel or Merez before we really wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, with Merez and Yaxel, I think has been a lot of people kind of know what his role is going to be and what he's going to do because he's such a high-profile player. Merez, again, this is an interesting piece to the puzzle because his offensive game is somewhat limited. He might honestly have the most limited offensive game out of all the bigs. Because, again, at least Mara, I think, brings exceptional passing and vision. Morez is just going to be a bully. And I think the biggest issue for Michigan last year, especially in the front court, was they were not prepared physically to play in the Big Ten, right? There's a lot of games where it seemed like they were getting pushed around a little bit by Michigan State, some of these other teams who, I mean, that's a main part of their game is physicality and crashing the glass. And so I think Morez was a direct pickup to combat that and turn it into a strength. And so I don't know where he fits in. I'm excited to see how they use him, but you're going to get hard play whenever he's on the floor, and he's going to set the tone, which I think is very important for a team of this caliber.
Yeah. We didn't really talk a ton about the freshman. I think Trey McKinney's a stud. Like, probably won't be an NBA player after 1 year just because there's like not enough room for him to showcase and NBA level skills with this team.
Yeah, he'll get on the floor if he can shoot. Same with Winters Grady. If these guys can come in and shoot, they will play. It's just this team is really talented. The Big Tens, again, are such a really good old conference. It's hard to pencil these guys in for many minutes, but again, they're very talented players. If they can shoot the ball, they will play. So
this is a super, super high floor team in my opinion. They finished 21st in Ken Palm last year. They had a borderline top 10 defense, a borderline top 40 offense. Even if that's the same output, I think they're probably going to be better just because college basketball as a whole is not going to be as good next year. But to me, like, this is a top 5 defense. With Dusty and the kind of magic he can whip up, I could see this being a top 10 offense as well. And, if you have that puts you right among the best teams in the country.
Yeah, this is a fully functional Dusty May team. And I think everyone around the program is really excited to see how these pieces come together.
Yeah. All right, that's going to do it for us today. This went longer than expected, but I felt like we got through a lot and had a really good discussion about your Wolverines, Dylan. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been season 6, episode 21 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers Tip-Off Talk episode, Michigan edition. We will have a lot more of these tip-off talks. Sam and I started our top 100 countdowns on Twitter today. You'll have to wait a while before you see the Michigan Wolverines in our countdowns. But again, Dylan, thanks so much for coming on. Always great to talk to you, bud.
Thanks for having me.